So a lot of people have been trying to orange pill their friends, their family members, etc., on Bitcoin, and they're struggling. People don't agree with them. People don't listen to them. People don't respect what they're saying, etc. So I wanted to do a video to talk to you about how I have spoken to people since 2020 and the methodology that I've used in order to get people interested in Bitcoin, and not only interested but willing to actually allocate to Bitcoin now rather than waiting for a while. So as far as the willingness and the excitement goes, it's taken me no more than an hour. And now with the ETFs, I bet I could do it in a much shorter time. So I want to go through the process of this. I think this is extremely important to understand, and the more people that I can make good at selling Bitcoin, right? Even though you're not really selling Bitcoin, like you're helping, educating on Bitcoin, but if I can help people become better at selling Bitcoin, whether you're going to use, cold storage or whether you're going to use the ETFs, I think the better it is for the world. And I want to educate you on how I've been doing that. I decided to sit down while I was smoking a cigar and figure out, like, okay, what's been my process? What's the stages of conversation that I've been going through with people? And then, basically condensing that down. And I've basically come up with a 3-step process that I've been using in order to do that, right? We can call this the Bitcoin selling Triad, okay? So the Bitcoin selling Triad is very, very simple. And there's probably a lot of advisors that are watching this who now finally have the ability to sell Bitcoin products but don't know how to sell this thing. So this is probably going to be useful for you as well, in addition to people who want to just get their family members into it. It's very, very simple. If you imagine a triangle, right? There's 3 parts to the triangle that make up the triangle. Once the triangle is made up, it is a triangle. And that means that once in this scenario, once the triangle is made up, it means that they allocate to Bitcoin. They allocate something to Bitcoin. Now, my initial goal with everyone is not to get them to allocate any more than 1%. I don't want to tell anyone to allocate anything like 20%, 30%, 50%. I don't want to say shit like, if you only put into Bitcoin what you're afraid to lose, because nobody gives a shit about that, especially people with money. The people that have been asking me about this, you're probably talking to people who are successful, who have assets, who have been doing the right thing, people like my parents that have been, investing in real estate, doing their own business, etc. And in order to get those people interested, you can't go in and say, oh, I need you to put in 50% of your net worth into Bitcoin. We're going to need to dump the whole property portfolio, sell all the businesses, and buy Bitcoin. It sounds stupid and insane. So I always start with the goal is 1%. So when I start talking to them, the question is, what is it going to take for you to invest and allocate 1% of your overall net worth into Bitcoin? So to put this into perspective, if you've got a millionaire, right, they're talking about $10,000. So this completely eradicates the fear around it, right? Because people look at that and go, wait a second, yeah, so my portfolio is worth $1 million and we're talking about 10 grand here, right? So they're instantly open to the idea of making this allocation. That's first. Need to handle that first, as far as I'm concerned, right? Again, this is just my strategy, right? I'm only going to focus on the greed part of it, because the type of people that I'm talking to are people who are successful, who have assets, who want to make money, who want to speculate, who've done it once in their life and need to be reminded that that person that has done that speculation once in their life is still there. So the 3-step process, as far as I'm concerned, is this. Step number 1, part number 1 of the triangle is the introduction part. This is the process where you introduce what Bitcoin is to people, right? And that is very, very simple. Actually, we'll come to this in a second. So I'll break down. So there's basically 3 parts to the triangle, and then there's 3 parts within each part, right? So the introduce is the first part, where you need to introduce people to what Bitcoin actually is, because most people don't care, right? And secondly is educate. They need to be educated on the importance of Bitcoin in their life, right? Bitcoin for their life. Not all the happy hippie stuff, not all the $1,000 net worth dreams, not the $10 a month DCA gang dreams. They need to be educated on why Bitcoin is important for their life. So that's educate. And then the third part of that triangle is allocate. They need to understand what are the options for allocation. They need to understand what is the safest option for allocation. They need to understand how do they do that allocation. And then once you introduce, educate, allocate, they know everything that they need to know, and most people feel safe to allocate 1% of their portfolio. So let's have a look at part one, which is the introduce part. What do you need to introduce to people? You need to introduce to them what is Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? And the best way to do that for people with assets, as far as that I've been talking to, is basically related to real estate, because most people that I've been speaking to, most of their wealth is in real estate. So I related to real estate, introduced them to what is Bitcoin in the way that I do it, and that takes care of that, and they understand that Bitcoin is like real estate. It is scarce. It has all of these factors, and it relates to real estate, and basically that's it. Like, I just introduced them to the idea of what is Bitcoin and how it relates to the one asset that they have the majority of in their portfolio, because that's where they're an expert, right? Number two, part of that introduction or introduce part of the triangle is I want to build excitement. I need them to understand why this is exciting. I need them to understand why this can be the future. And I'm not talking about excitement from your perspective. If you're a $1,000 net worth or a $10 a month DCA gang or a happy hippie member, exciting to you is not going to be exciting to someone who's got a $5 million property portfolio. What is exciting to them? Build excitement from their perspective. What actually creates excitement for them in their property portfolio? Probably means making more money, right? That's going to lead to excitement for them. What's probably going to mean is securing their future. And what's probably going to happen is exactly what drives me, which is being right? So build that excitement. And then that's the second part of that introduce part of the triangle. And then the third part, the final part of the introduce triangle, is the latest developments. Give them the latest developments on what's going on with Bitcoin. Regulatory, most of the time, is the one that works, because people just want to know that they're doing the right thing and they're safe, etc., etc. So give them the regulatory oversights or the latest developments on Bitcoin that make them feel comfortable for the position that they are at in life. And that's it. Step one of that triangle is introduce. And introduce, you need to tell them what Bitcoin is, build excitement, and give them the latest developments. And then you move on to step number two. Once you get somebody to knowing what Bitcoin is, they're excited, and they know the latest developments, it's very simple. You want to learn about, more about what this is? Of course, the answer is going to be yes. At that point, you get to building trust, right? The second part of the triangle is educate. And inside of educate, there's three parts to that too. Number one, build trust. You need them to actually trust Bitcoin. And they're not going to trust Bitcoin because you tell them that, El Salvador has Bitcoin. It's not going to build trust, because BlackRock controls 482% more Bitcoin than El Salvador inside of one trading session of the ETF. So the building trust part is not going to come where you go, because this happy hippie over here said that. But no, it's not going to work for most people. They need to understand, and they need to have trust that what they're going to do here, the allocation they're going to make, is going to be safe, secure, and stable, right? So you need to build trust around what Bitcoin is. Why is it trustable? Why are all these institutions going towards it? Why is all this happening? And that's extremely important. Second part of that is why it belongs in a portfolio. And most importantly with that, why it belongs in their portfolio. Personalize it to them. Why does it belong in their portfolio, not in other people's portfolio, not in the world's portfolio, not in $1,000 net worth's portfolio? Why does it belong in their portfolio? That is extremely important for them too, because once they understand that you personalize it for them, they'll understand, okay, so if you own property, why do you own property? You own property because you want to create a legacy, you want to have a cash flow, you want to create a legacy and leave something for your children, right? Of course. So now, if you've got Bitcoin that's coming up, that's backed by all these institutions, there's all this regulatory support that's coming for it, you know it's the scarcest thing on earth, you know it's guaranteed, don't you think you need a little bit of that in your portfolio in order to create in order to create the goal that you started your portfolio with? Of course. So next you move on to future potential, because ultimately people who have money only care about making more money. So and I don't care whether you like that or not. I don't care whether that makes you happy or sad or angry or whatever. At the end of the day, the future potential of Bitcoin is very, very important. And the future potential means many different things. But for these people who have wealth, who have assets, what matters is it safe? Is it going to make me money? That's it. right? And if you can explain that it's safe and it's going to make you money because Bank of America bull market multiple, you've got all of the ETFs unlocking this amount of capital. Now you can trade options. It's going to be cash flow. All this other stuff that's coming out about the future potential of Bitcoin, and you model it out for them, saying, so you make it as ridiculous as possible, and then say, what if it does 50% of that, right? It's still insane for your portfolio, right? And then that's your education part of your triangle done. So you had your introduce, you got your educate. Now we need to allocate, right? So again, look at what we've been through so far. We've introduced them to Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin? Built the excitement, given them the latest developments to make them feel comfortable. Introduce, done. Educate. We're going to build trust, why it belongs in their portfolio, and the future potential of Bitcoin, which again, it adds a little bit of excitement to it, and it helps them understand, okay, this is why I need to get into it. Nobody got into property because it was just like, hey, I'm just going to get into property. They got into property to make money. So they're going to get into Bitcoin to make money, right? And you got to speak to that, right? So that's that educate done. Introduce, educate. Now allocate. In terms of allocation, it's very simple. My process is this. You determine the percentage you want to allocate. The problem with this is most people are going to get very excited and then have buyer's remorse after they get in because of the volatility of it. So I always start with 1%. If they say, oh no, why don't we do 10%? You can do 10% next week. But right now, I'm going to do 1%. Get in 1%, understand what it is, educate yourself more, learn more, read more, etc., and then you can start doing your 10% or whatever else you want to do, 5%, 10%, whatever else. Right now, 1%. And then be like, no, but like I like this idea, let's do more. No, 1%. Because the worst thing you want is they go 10% and in the first week, Bitcoin drops 10%, right? That you don't want that, because that's going to create buyer's remorse in someone who's not used to that level of volatility. So 1%, that's it, right? So you determine the percentage. That's the first stage of this allocate part of the triangle. Then you want to explore the vehicles. So for me, at this point in time, if I'm talking to someone about the ETF, there's really two solutions here. It's self-custody or ETF. And if I want to drive them towards the ETF for the advisors that are listening here, it's very simple. If I was talking about self-custody versus the ETF, for me personally, I would always say self-custody is the premier solution that there is for Bitcoin, but it involves learning about where to buy it. You're going to buy it from the Coinbase exchange. You're going to buy it. You're going to, custody it in your wallet. You need to know what a wallet is. You need to know, you need to go find a service like Casa or whoever else that does multi-sig solutions, all of that. Basically, I would outline everything that's involved with self-custody, and then I would say, or you just go into your broker account, we click 2 buttons, and we get your 1% allocation. Because if you've got, a few $1 million in your portfolio or a few hundreds of thousands of dollars in your portfolio, you probably got an allocation to something that we can liquidate right now and get you into a 1% allocation of your total net worth into Bitcoin. So you explore all the vehicles. And again, if you're someone who's trying to, coach family members, then you might want to stick to the self-custody. It might just take a little bit more time. At this point, I would just focus on the ETF, because they can get their 1% in the ETF, and it's safe for most people. It's BlackRock, it's Fidelity, etc., and then the rest of it you can talk about doing self-custody, and they can learn about that. And then the third part to the allocation segment is guide them to the right fund. Right? So if I was working for BlackRock, I would talk about why the BlackRock fund is the best. If I was working for Fidelity, I would talk about why the Fidelity fund is the best. If I was working, you get the point here. If I was working for self-custody, I would talk about why self-custody is the best here. So this is what I basically did. Most of the time, it doesn't take long. It's 60 minutes, if that. And now with the ETF, I'm pretty sure it would take only 30 minutes. If you've got any questions about this, put them in the comments, and subscribe to the channel, because by subscribing to the channel, you can help me spank the YouTube algorithm to get more people educated on how to teach people about Bitcoin, because that's what's needed right now. And if you're an advisor, this is what I believe. It's worked for me. This is what I believe you need to understand about Bitcoin. You need to be up to date on all of these different factors that are in this video about getting somebody who is, got $8 million worth of real estate into a 1% allocation on your Bitcoin fund that you're going to make money on, they're going to make money on, they're going to be happy about, etc. So this is my process. introduce, educate, allocate, and then the 3 parts each of each of those things. And that's my process for anyone who is trying to help somebody get from 0 to 1% into Bitcoin, and then everything else goes beyond that. If you got any questions, put them in the comments. But ultimately, despite all of this, despite you getting better, and I want to commend people trying to get better at this, despite getting better at this, there's always only 3 rules to Bitcoin. Step number 1, you buy Bitcoin. Step number 2, you shut the fuck up. And step number 3, you get fabulously wealthy.